Hey everybody, this is Josh and welcome to Consume the Canon. This week we're going to be talking about novels, and also the end of Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith. So we got a lot of stuff to cover, so let's just jump right into it. First up is the novel Ahsoka. So this novel takes place immediately after Order 66, shortly thereafter Order 66, and it's all about Ahsoka Tano, former Anakin Padawan, and what's been happening with her and what she's doing and where she's going. And basically, just like every other Jedi that's still alive, she is on the run and trying to figure out how to stay alive. For her, that means kind of jumping from planet to planet, helping out people where she can, and then once things start getting a little bit too familiar, she moves on to somewhere else. The story follows her on one of these jumps until she lands on a planet that's a kind of strong agricultural planet, very minimal technological planet, and she sets herself up as a fix-it person. So she's going to be assisting the different folks who are working on the farms to kind of make sure that their crops are produced. The main reason why she's dropping here, though, is because she doesn't feel like there's going to be an Imperial presence here. It's way out in the Outer Rim. No one's really cares about this planet, and she thinks that that's going to be enough to protect her. Turns out, it's not. Of course, the Empire shows up. Of course, the Empire starts doing what the Empire does, pushing against the people, pushing against the farmers, making their lives difficult. And of course, Ahsoka wants to help them. Now, the problem here is that Ahsoka can't tell them that she's a Jedi. She doesn't tell them that she fought in the Clone Wars. So when she tries to help them with things, they don't really listen to her. And that's where the main difficulty in this story comes from. Ahsoka finally commits to helping these farmers fight against the Empire, and she gives them a plan to follow. However, they don't follow the plan. They kind of follow their own plan, and the Empire decides to mess up a whole bunch of them. Their plan goes awry, the Empire's killing a bunch of them, and to protect the ones that survived, Ahsoka uses her force powers. So she doesn't have a lightsaber. She had to actually leave her lightsaber on the fake grave of Captain Rex to make it seem realistic. But she doesn't have a lightsaber, but she does use a force push and a couple other things to free her friends and get them away from the Empire. Well, Jedi start using force pushes all over the place. Guess who's going to show up? The Inquisitorius, specifically Sixth Brother. So Sixth Brother shows up and he does the kinds of things you expect the dark side to do. He starts killing innocent people to get Ahsoka to react. And eventually she does. There's a whole thing in here where she actually goes back to the previous planet she was on and she's talking to this force-sensitive kid and then she comes back. But really it's just about her deciding that she needs to stand up for these people and fight Sixth Brother, and she does defeat him, and that is actually where she ends up getting her kyber crystals for her new lightsaber. She has a stone that basically directs her to where her next kyber crystal is going to be, and it turns out it is the bled kyber crystals in Sixth Brother's lightsaber. So she unbleeds his kyber crystals, and that helps her create the white lightsabers, which we see on Ahsoka in the Rebels series. Overall, the novel is good. I was really looking for a little bit more from it. I enjoyed it. But I felt like it was a little by the numbers, and I would have liked to see a little bit more challenging things happen in the novel itself. Overall, though, it was a fun read. Next up are two short stories, Voice of the Empire and Orientation. Voice of the Empire is about a news broadcaster who her HoloNet news feed gets taken over by the Empire and becomes their state-run media channel. And they force her to basically be a mouthpiece for them instead of actually, reporting real news. Of course, by the end of the story, she has figured out a way to actually send secret messages to the rebellion, the burgeoning rebellion. This is the very early stages of the rebellion. But she is giving these kind of fluff pieces while at the same time giving very specific guidance and information to the rebels who are watching it. It's a neat story, and it shows really from how many different angles the rebellion is coming at the Empire. They've got their fingers in everything they possibly can, and at this point, which is still 18 BBY, it's pretty early, they're really kind of testing their limits of what's going to work and what isn't. After that is Orientation. This is a short story that happens immediately before Lords of the Sith, and it's about Emperor Palpatine and Darth Vader traveling to Ryloth, and while they're doing it, encountering a general who has been in the Navy for 50 years, and he's been training Navy officers, and he's a very like my way or the highway hardline kind of guy. At the end of the story, we realize that he actually, because he doesn't agree with the way the Empire works, and he doesn't agree with how the Republic basically changed over to the Empire, he actually attempts to assassinate the Emperor and Darth Vader by changing a hyperspace route so it goes too close to a black hole. The person who discovers that this has actually been done is none other than Rey Sloane. Rey Sloane, who is much more prominent later on in the canon, but this is her first appearance as a deck officer. But eventually she becomes a Grand Admiral during the Civil War period and, Return of the Jedi and that kind of era. This short story I really dug. It's really interesting because it actually shows the Emperor and Darth Vader kind of having an argument. We see a lot more of it in Lords of the Sith, but it's the first time where we see their relationship not be strictly, master and apprentice. After this is the novel Lords of the Sith, and this is the first thing in the canon which I can honestly say I did not enjoy. So basically it is Darth Vader and the Emperor going to Ryloth to try and quell a rebellion. And when they arrive, Cham Syndulla and his rebel troops, they're not really part of the rebellion yet. They're only really rebelling against the Imperial occupation of Ryloth. They actually take down the Star Destroyer, and the Emperor and Darth Vader crash land on Ryloth. There's a lot of other stuff going on here. There's like an Imperial who helps Cham Syndulla, get all of his information. He's kind of like a low-rent Oren Krennic. There's also this other Moff who's there who is kind of incompetent. And it's a very weird way to tell the story. But frankly, most of the story is just Darth Vader and the Emperor killing a bunch of these monsters that live on the surface of Ryloth. Literally 40 pages of the story is just describing them fighting monsters with lightsabers. It's not great. I really did not enjoy it that much. There are some interesting parts that happen, though. I think the most interesting is all the way at the end, where the Emperor basically commands Darth Vader to kill a whole bunch of women and children. And Darth Vader does it without pause for thought or breath. And it's brutal, but it shows that even though throughout the whole book and in the short story they were arguing and kind of bickering in a weird sort of power play sort of way, the Emperor's still in charge at this point, and Darth Vader is still his lapdog. So yeah, from a content perspective, I didn't really like it that much. From a canon perspective, it doesn't really give that much insight. Overall, this is one of the first things I'd say you can genuinely skip. Next up is the short story Mercy Mission, which takes place sometime after the end of Lords of the Sith. And this is about a Mercy Mission from the same kind of rebel troops that we were looking at when we were looking at Cham Syndulla, trying to make a run down to Ryloth. It's a pretty simple story, but the key thing about this story is that it is the first appearance of Hera Syndulla as she's probably only about 13 or 14 years old at this time, but she actually takes over the flying of the craft when things go awry. She's got some really good plans for how they can get away from the Empire. It's a fun short story, and the introduction of Hera is absolutely perfect. It is, spot on as far as how they deliver her as a character. Really great. And it's a nice segue into Tarkin. Tarkin, as opposed to Lords of the Sith, is phenomenal. It is an absolutely phenomenal read from beginning to end. It does so much to add depth to the Grand Moff Tarkin, the Wilf Tarkin character. And it is also extremely enjoyable. The entire book is basically about Tarkin and how he has to manage this group of rebels who have attacked one of the bases that he's at, which supports the supply lines to the Death Star, as the Death Star is still being built. And it's all a cat and mouse game between Tarkin and this rebel group, and him trying to track down who they are and what they're doing. And at one point, they actually steal his spaceship, the Carrion Spike. The best parts about Tarkin is that, first off, it gives us all of this information about his growing up before he joined the Empire, about how difficult his parents were, about how difficult his childhood was, and about how he got to be governor. Much of the story is actually told as Tarkin is growing up on Eriadu, and as he's going through this rite of passage, tracking animals out in some of the most deserted parts of his planet, leading all up to a moment where he has to actually struggle against a bunch of Veermok at this place called the Carrion Spike. There's a loop back to that at the end of the story. They're constantly referring to it as every time they reference his ship. The story is constructed so well. And one of my favorite parts of the story is a moment where Darth Vader and Grand Moff Tarkin are walking down a hallway in Tarkin's Star Destroyer. And Vader is asking Tarkin about the name of his ship and how he grew up and where he was from. And it's really interesting because even Tarkin is amazed that he's having a conversation with Darth Vader. Their previous encounters have been very adversarial, but this is the moment where they kind of break past that barrier and realize we're both extremely important people here. We're both extremely talented. We need to work together if we're going to support the Emperor as best we can. The other thing that's interesting about this novel is that Tarkin figures everything out in his head. He understands why people do what they do, and he uses it to basically make his best guesses about things. But he never overplays his hand. That's kind of his speciality. In the book, Tarkin has figured out that Palpatine is a Sith Lord, that Darth Vader is Anakin Skywalker, that Anakin was probably responsible for the murder of all the Jedi. Like, he figures all this stuff out, but none of it has any real value for him, so he doesn't need to share it. He doesn't need to challenge anyone, because what's he going to do? Get more powerful? It gets him nothing. And so he doesn't share it, but we hear inside of his head him figuring these things out, and it's extremely eye-opening, and it also it makes Tarkin a fully realized three-dimensional villain, which I can't wait until I get to A New Hope, because I feel like it's going to add even more impact to his eventual death. After this are the last issues of Dark Lord of the Sith. The first issue is an issue called Bad Ground, and it's a really neat segue from Tarkin, because Bad Ground, the conceit of that issue is that Darth Vader has asked Tarkin to kill him. Now, he doesn't really want Tarkin to kill him. He really wants to challenge himself. He wants to see if Tarkin can actually kill him, much because he's learned so much about him from the previous novel and their experiences and their discussions. He thinks Tarkin might be the person who can actually take him down. It's one issue. It's very exciting. It's fun watching the two of them go at each other. And the end, you really see it kind of a draw. Like, Tarkin gets Vader into a very compromising position, but Vader makes it clear, yeah, if I really wanted to, I could still kill you. It's really fun, especially for just a one issue arc. Then there is Fortress Vader. So I'm not going to go into detail about Fortress Vader because I don't want to spoil anything. But this is a 7-issue arc that every issue is better than the last. The general idea is that Vader is still hunting down Jedi with the Inquisitorius. And at some point, Vader says to the Emperor, I need my own place. I need my own castle. I need my own fortress where I can focus more of my energies into exploring the dark side of the Force. And so, the Emperor says, yeah, that sounds good. Why don't you go to Mustafar? And so, of course, hey, why don't you just go back to the place where you almost died? That'd be fun. So Vader goes back to Mustafar, and the rest of the series is about him trying to figure out where to build this fortress, more exploration into the dark side, finally building the fortress up so that it focuses his dark side energy so that he can actually break through to the dark side of the Force and enter the dark side of the Force. And it's absolutely phenomenal. The writing, the art, the story in general. The last issue of Fortress Vader will go down as one of the top 5 most important things in the Star Wars canon. It is absolutely amazing. And issue 25 is really the marker where we see Anakin die. Anakin is separated from Darth Vader by the end of this. And all we have left after issue 25 is just Darth Vader as dark as it gets. If you haven't read this series, stop right now. Go out and buy it. It is spectacular from beginning to end. There are 2 more things that I'm going to cover this week. The first one is a comic called Trouble Again. It's in the Star Wars Adventures series. This is the first time that R2-D2 and C-3PO work together after C-3PO has had his memory erased. It's very fun. It's very simple. It's a kid's comic, but it's got some neat moments in it. And then the next one is a short story called TK-462. And this is about a stormtrooper and how he sees some rebels attack a town near him. So that makes him want to join as a stormtrooper. He becomes a stormtrooper. It shows a couple of different encounters he has as a stormtrooper. And it ends with a young girl fighting against him. And so it's got a nice little loop back of this girl essentially becoming a rebel because of him. It's one of my favorite short stories that is in the canon up until this point. Again, it's a Star Wars Insider short story. But yeah, it's a great read. This and Orientation, I think, are right up at the top of the ones that I enjoyed the most. And that's all I got for this week for Consume the Canon. Next week is Solo Block. All of the content for Han Solo and the Solo A Star Wars Story film. Until then, this is Josh, and thanks for watching Consume the Canon.